Hello, this is Xander Drury, and welcome to our Chalke Valley History Festival podcast from day one. And what a triumphant opening day it has been. The weeks of hard work have finally paid off as the all-new 22-acre site opened its doors, its gates, its fields, its stiles, even its cows to scores of enthusiastic history supporters. And over the course of the week, we're expecting over 15,000 visitors, up from the 3,000 last year. And with over 50 events, the huge ambition and scale of the festival really cannot be doubted. Now, although set in the most dramatic and spectacular of settings, the reason everybody has donned their Wellingtons and supported this festival so much is because of the richly diverse and stimulating programme James Holland has devised. And tonight's offerings certainly whet our historical appetite of things to come this week. Now, unfortunately, moments before the opening events at 6:30, the festival suffered a slight setback as all the power in the site went down for over 2 hours. However, it was unable to thwart the speakers who really did dazzle. First up was Thomas Asbridge, one of the world's leading authorities on the Crusades. So I briefly caught up with him earlier after his talk. Well, thank you for joining us today. First of all, why are the Crusades so special, do you think?
Well, I think they're special in that you can't get away from the fact that they're an incredibly exciting period of history to study. So they are full of extraordinary characters, larger-than-life events, the kind of stuff that really stir your blood. But I also think they have a lot to tell us about human past and also human nature. And one of the things that I think they're so revealing about is the power of what I call otherness. Technically, you call it alterity, the idea of them and us, and the idea that human societies have a natural tendency to categorise their enemies as something different from them, to see them somehow as faceless opponents. We see this very powerfully in the Crusades, and I think it's one of the major currents, one of the drivers of human history.
So you think the impact of the Crusades has a huge... the impact of the Crusades is massive on today's society, you would argue?
No, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, if you study it, you can learn a lot about human history and human nature. What I think we have to be very cautious about is trying to calibrate exactly how important the Crusades were in the past. They undoubtedly played a very, very significant role in shaping the Middle Ages.
Absolutely.
What I'm less certain of, and what I try to argue very strongly, is that we should not overstate their significance in the modern world, and most fundamentally that there's not a direct line linking the medieval world of the Crusades and the modern world in which we now live.
Okay. I mean, in your talk you discussed the writing of your book a lot, but didn't mention the making of the programmes on the BBC, which came out earlier in the year. But how difficult is it to keep making approaches on the Crusades fresher and interesting when it's been revisited so many times? It depends what your approach is, depends what you want to try to achieve. So in the context of the book, one of the things I talked about in my lecture, which was important to me, was to try to produce a single volume history that viewed the Crusades through both the prism of Western European history but also Islamic Near Eastern history. And I think that brought new life to it as a subject for me studying it, and also in the way I presented it. In terms of trying to achieve that on television, I mean, television in some ways is obviously a very blunt tool compared to a book, where you can very carefully piece together, lay out your argument. I count myself as, by no means would I suggest that the series is perfect in any way, but I count myself very lucky that I feel proud of what we did. I think I've had lots of experiences of doing other television programs and appearances, and very often they can feel quite compromised, and I didn't feel compromised in this series. I worked with a team of people who were very serious about what they did. They allowed me a lot of freedom to say what I wanted to say. So I'm proud of what we did within the constraints of 3 episodes, 3 hours. There's obviously a massive feat of compression that has to take place, but the idea of it was to try to bring an authentic sense of what happened in the medieval past, and to then play upon that theme that I mentioned earlier on, the idea that
we shouldn't be overly ready to drag the Crusades into today.
Sure, absolutely. And lastly, power cuts aside, what are your thoughts on the festival thus far?
Well, thus far it's very early days because it's the first lecture, but I think
Sure.
I think it's a fantastic concept. I think it's great to have. I'm a great fan of literary festivals in general because I think they're wonderful celebrations of thought, of writing, of engagement with culture. And the idea of having one that's dedicated to history is fantastic because I think anything that can fuel and spark interest in the past has to be applauded.
Well, Tom, thank you very much for joining us tonight. It really was a scintillating opening to the festival in front of a 500-strong crowd. Now, next up was local boy Tom Holland, patron of the festival and raised here in Chalke Valley. Best-selling author of Rubicon and Persian Fire, Tom has recently brought out his new book, In the Shadow of the Sword, exploring how the ancient world came to an end and how Islam arose. I joined Tom for a chat in the swanky Chalke Valley Green Room shortly before his talk. So obviously, thanks Tom for joining us tonight. This is you grew up here, this is your backyard.
I grew up in Broad Chalke.
Okay.
So, 3 villages down the valley.
So what's it like coming here and giving a talk pretty much in your backyard then?
Well, it makes it much more nervous.
Really?
Because of course I will know loads of people in the audience. Usually when you give a talk, you come, you don't care because, well, you do care, but you sort of feel if you totally mess it up, at least you can go away and you'll never see anybody in the audience. When you've got your parents and your brother in the audience, that really does sort of up the pressure.
Sure.
But equally, it's incredible knowing these fields, come here and see this extraordinary array of tents and things.
So obviously your brother James has co-founded the whole festival,
Yes.
so have you been very much involved in the...
Lending moral support
'Cause you're
from the back
patron.
of the room. No, I've tried to do all I can to support it, but it's absolutely, I just stand back in awe at everything that my brother and James Hennish have achieved.
Absolutely.
Sort of from scratch. It's just unbelievable.
It's staggering. So your new book is Shadow of the Sword, came out, what?
In April.
In April, okay. So how's the reaction been